Okay, guys, I'm going to try to pick up where we left off the other day to try to get you some more material because we are going to have your quiz tomorrow. If you still have questions, you can shoot me an email or we can try to do a Google Hangout or something like that later. So we were on the Spanish-American War. We had watched the video about the sinking of the Maine, that it wasn't the Spanish possibly, that it was more than likely an internal combustion on the ship itself. But all of these things listed here are going to be the causes of the war. We're going to tie them all together, and that's what's going to lead to the Spanish-American War. Cuban revolt was huge because they didn't like the way that they were being treated by the Spanish. The Spanish saw them as a lesser people and kind of enslaved them in a way. We had talked about that earlier. The Yellow Press was really exaggerating the story and creating false accounts of what was taking place in an effort to sell newspapers. And so American public was reading that and was like, we need to help people. And then the DeLome letter. Remember, we can make fun of our politicians and our president, but we don't like it when other people do. So if you want to watch the video again, we have the sinking of the Maine, which goes over that. So let's get to the war itself. Okay, we are going to issue an ultimatum to Spain for a ceasefire. They agreed, but public pressure pushed for the war on our half. The American public really saw the need for independence, like we had fought for our independence from the British, and we wanted to do the same for Cuba. So we continued to push for our involvement in this battle. So 4 reasons for the U.S. to intervene in Cuba on behalf of the rebels. They wanted to put an end to what was taking place. The Cubans were being treated terribly. We also wanted to protect the lives and the property of U.S. citizens that were living in Cuba. We did have quite a few plantations there. We also wanted to stop them from messing with trade. That's the 3rd reason. And our final reason is it was just kind of messing with everything. And you got to keep in mind that Cuba's like 50 miles away. And that made us nervous with how close they were to the United States. The Teller Amendment is what we're going to put together before we actually join the war effort. And it is basically says, hey, we're going to fight on your behalf, but we have no intention of taking you over. So we're not going to annex you. We're not going to make you a territory of the United States. We're basically just going to fight for you. We're going to see how much we're actually going to stick to this belief here later on. So the war itself is going to be involved in any place where the Spanish fleet is. So the Philippines is one of those places. We want to show off our cool new ships. So Roosevelt is going to send over Dewey to the Philippines. We're going to wipe it out pretty quickly at Manila Bay with a short ground war too. The invasion of Cuba itself is going to be a little bit more challenging for Americans because we weren't really prepared. I mean, it's hot, it's muggy, it's, subtropical climate, and a lot of people are going to get wiped out for disease. However, all that in stride, we are still going to be able to take over the Spanish pretty quickly. One of the major battles was San Juan Hill, which is going to be led by Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, which were basically a bunch of wealthy, once like Western cowboys that wanted to go fight for independence. So pretty much Roosevelt and his homies. So they're going to take out the Spanish and we are going to win. In the end, we are going to acquire several pieces of territory and property, which we'll get to later. All right, the Treaty of Peace for the end of the Spanish-American War. The terms of the treaty are going to call for a recognition of Cuban independence. That's what they were fighting for from the beginning. And we are also going to acquire Puerto Rico and the island of Guam. The Spanish are going to offer to sell us the Philippines for $20 million, and we're going to take them up on that. That's an important note to remember because when we get to World War II, the Philippines, of course, are not going to be really happy about us purchasing them, and they are going to fight against us the entire time. But when we get to World War II and we become very reflective about what we've been fighting for, we're going to look back on this purchase of the Philippines as a mistake, and we're going to actually give them their independence. That's not going to be for a while yet, so don't get too excited. So results of the war, the big ones, the insular cases. So did the Constitution that we have here in the United States follow with the flag? Because Cuba is not going to be one of our territories. The Philippines is going to be one of our territories, but they're not technically a state. So what were the rights of the Philippine people? Supreme Court ruled that the rights were not automatically extended. So the freedoms we enjoyed here in the continental U.S. will not be extended to the Filipino people. The Platt Amendment, remember, we didn't take over Cuba, but is basically going to say, Cuba, you can't make any major move without our permission. So they couldn't sign treaties. They couldn't really make any kind of agreement without our permission. And we're going to put a big old base on it called Guantanamo Bay. Should sound vaguely familiar. In the election in 1900, McKinley and Roosevelt won easily over the non-imperialist William Jennings Bryan. We're going to talk about him a lot and his free silver movement. And so they are going to continue on to the annexation of Hawaii. All right, missionaries and entrepreneurs had been here for a really long time. We grew a lot of sugarcane there. It was the perfect climate. And most of the people that grew sugarcane on the island were actually American settlers, plantation owners. And they were kind of upset by the fact that they had to pay a tax on the sugarcane because Hawaii itself was not owned, so it was seen as foreign trade. So they come up with a plan to overthrow the new queen. The king had been okay with the Americans being there. Queen Liliuokalani was not. She wanted to recapture the island for her own native population. So in 1893, American settlers pretty easily overthrow Queen Liliuokalani. It comes to Cleveland to make it a territory, and Cleveland says no. He said what we did was a terrible thing. He actually offers an apology to Queen Liliuokalani, and they do not annex the island. In 1898, McKinley feels the opposite of Cleveland, and we annex the island. It is a territory of the United States in 1900, and will actually enter official statehood in 1959. All right, moving on again. We're going to go to China now. Open door policy in China. Russia, Japan, Great Britain, France, and Germany all had what we call these spheres of influence. That means that they had certain areas of China that they could trade within. They had ports that they could use and whatnot. They dominated the country for trade, and because we didn't have a sphere of influence, of course, that did not make us very happy. So we're going to push for what we call open door trading, which means that it did not matter. You didn't have to have a specific sphere, that anybody that had the cash and the willingness to could be trading with China. The Boxer Rebellion of 1900, xenophobia was on the rise in China. The Boxers were actually like this missionary group within China, so Chinese or religious faction, and they attacked foreigners and murdered Christian missionaries. They didn't want Christians coming in and destroying their way of life. The U.S. comes in and crushes the rebellion, of course, to protect our own property and American lives. All right, so looking at foreign policy tactics during this time period, we have two different people that we're going to be talking about, Roosevelt versus Taft. Roosevelt, we haven't done a lot with the politics. He was president first, very beloved by the people. He has a very stigmatic personality. Taft is going to follow him up, not so much. He's the big fat guy that got stuck in a tub. So Roosevelt had what he called a big stick policy. He has that quote, speak softly and carry a big stick. And it was the idea of being prepared to throw down if you had to throw down. So we had an amazing Navy at the time. We had a trained military. So if push came to shove, we were going to throw. So one of those things where we actually do throw down is at the Panama Canal. This had land that had been originally purchased by France. They were unable to complete the canal, so we want permission to build the canal there, so we buy the land from France, and we got to have permission from Panama to be able to do this. Well, Panama at the time was under the constraints of Colombia, so we incite a riot, we incite a revolution within Colombia amongst the people so that we can gain the land in Panama so we can build the canal. So we build the canal. It's sweet. It takes a long time. A lot of people die. Again, lots of diseases and nastiness. But it's a success. Roosevelt corollary is going to pay the debts of all the people in especially South America to keep the Europeans out. The Russo-Japanese War he's gonna arrange a conference, a diplomatic conference, and he's actually gonna win the Nobel Peace Prize for this because he's gonna bring an end to the war. The Gentleman's Agreement, that Japan would restrict immigration to lessen discrimination that was happening in California. Again, we will talk quite a bit about this later down the road. We get into a very anti-Asian movement and immigration, and the Japanese were one of the people that we did not want in the United States. So they come to an agreement, because of course, this was kind of demoralizing to the Japanese. So they come to an agreement that Japan would not let as many people immigrate from Japan to the United States in an effort to help with that. And the Great White Fleet is the huge navy that Roosevelt creates during his time, and then he's going to send it out around the world to basically say, hey, look at our giant ships, don't be messing with us. Taft follows Roosevelt. He was not as much of a public figure when it comes in terms of foreign policy. He believed in dollar diplomacy. So instead of waving his big stick around and threatening to beat people up, he threw cash around. So he thought payment would be the best way to solve a lot of problems. He's going to push for the building of railroads in China, and then he's going to intervene in a conflict in Nicaragua. So not as much excitement as Roosevelt had. And the last president that comes out of this progressive era in terms of foreign policy is going to be Wilson. Wilson believed in moral diplomacy. So you have big stick diplomacy with Roosevelt, speak softly, carry a big stick, throw down when you have to. Dollar diplomacy with Taft, throw down cash when at all possible. And then moral diplomacy. He's really going to respect other nations, and he's going to try to work with other nations. Which is ironic, because Woodrow Wilson is the one that showed Birth of a Nation, the incredibly racist film that the KKK uses to still recruit members within the White House and say it's one of the greatest films of all time. But anywho, the Philippines, he's going to create the Jones Act. It's going to give them territorial status. They're going to write their own Bill of Rights. And they're going to give suffrage to male Filipino citizens, no women again. And they are going to promise independence when a stable government is created. We're going to fall back on this promise for about, the next 40 years. Finally, after World War II, they'll have that independence. Puerto Rico, 1917, U.S. citizenship to all provided for and a limited self-government. Puerto Rico today, not a state, still a territory, but they have a governor, and they do have representation, but non-voting representation in most of our U.S. Senate. The Panama Canal, repeal an act that gave U.S. free passage. We built it. We thought we got free passage. That really ticked off some other nations. So we're going to repeal that, and down the road, too, we're also going to write a deal that the Panama gets the canal back in, 1999. I think that comes under Carter. That'll be coming up later on. And then conciliation treaties. William Jennings Bryan, who becomes Secretary of State, will negotiate treaties in which nations pledge to submit disputes to international commissions like the UN and observe a 1-year cooling off period before action. Because we got a lot of action during this time period. A lot of things are throwing down. So I hope this quick lesson has helped you out. I'm going to post the whole slideshow itself. Remember, some pieces might be in chapter 27, some pieces might be in other chapters. This is all pulled by period 7, so hopefully this will help you for your quiz tomorrow. Have a great snow day, kids. If you have more questions or concerns, we can either set up a Google Hangout later on, or you can just email this to me and I will try to get back to them, and hopefully I will have your test grades posted later today. Have a great snow day, kiddos.